Good morning, my name is Mariana T, and today I will be analyzing the question: to what extent have the actions, activism, and work of influential non-government officials shaped the opinions and decisions of Americans since the start of the civil rights movement in the 1950s? Through my research, I concluded that the actions, activism approaches, and work of influential figures have shaped and influenced the manner in which Americans view and react to different political and social matters, and has caused a positive growth to specific movements that they endorse and the political parties associated with these movements. First, in order to analyze this claim, we must look back to the beginning of the 1950s with the rise of the civil rights movement. So the main goal of the movement was to give blacks the same rights as whites under law. And they fought for things such as equal opportunities, desegregation, voting rights, and to be free of racial discrimination. The movement gave rise to many influential figures that led to its popularity and success, such as Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat to a white person on the bus in order to protest segregation, Malcolm X, who fiercely sought to expose white America's crimes against black Americans and encouraged blacks to fight back against white oppression, and Bayard Rustin, who organized the famous March on Washington, and many others. But perhaps the most important of these figures, and the one that most people associate with the civil rights movement, is Martin Luther King Jr. Through his strong belief in nonviolent protests, King set the tone for the civil rights movement and influenced thousands of Americans to rise to action against discrimination and social injustices, becoming the face of the movement itself. Although his most famous influence on the movement is definitely the "I Have a Dream" speech from the March of Washington, King also inspired Americans with his letter from Birmingham jail. In this letter, King responds to 8 white clergymen who denounced his method of activism by pointing out how their belief that it wasn't the right time for these protests stemmed from the fact that they weren't the ones being oppressed. King stated that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed, which pushed the idea that the time of change is now and that people need to rise up and protest against the immorality of segregation. This letter led many Americans to join the protest against segregation, causing tremendous growth in support of the civil rights movement, which led to the legal decision to desegregate in 1964, which was the year after this letter was published. Other major influential figures that impacted the civil rights movement were celebrities such as Bob Dylan, with his song "Blowing in the Wind," which became an unofficial anthem of the movement, which was even played at the March on Washington. This song, which its questions about the wrongs of the world and political commentary mixed with its calm melody, affected many listeners emotionally and gave it much of its power in the movement. At a time where music was not expected to have a deep meaning, Dylan made his work into a form of protest, influencing the way in which people express their political opinions and affecting Americans in a platform which was usually not used for political activism, and that allowed the civil rights movement to expand. Over the years since the civil rights movement, many other social and political movements have come to popularity, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, the Take a Knee movement, the Me Too movement, and the March for Our Lives movement. Similarly to the civil rights movement, all of these movements have a central figure or celebrity that endorses these movements and are associated with them, such as for the Me Too movement, we have Lady Gaga, who was a victim of sexual assault. For the March for Our Lives, we got Emma Gonzalez, who was a Parkland victim. For Take a Knee, Colin Kaepernick, who refused to stand up for the national anthem in order to protest violence, and LeBron James, who is equally involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. All of this raises the question of how influential to these movements these leaders truly are, and how this impacts the actions and opinions of Americans. According to a study by the National Sun Yat-sen University in Taiwan, stars and athletes had favorable effects on college students' approval of endorsed political statements and positions. And it was also found that movie stars and athletes' implicit endorsements, such as with financial support, affected young voters' views of the endorsed parties. The study also found that celebrity-endorsed Get Out the Vote campaigns, such as the political and social movements that I previously mentioned, persuaded young voters to participate in an election campaign by decreasing voters' complacency and increasing their self-efficiency. In this chart by the study, it can also be seen that the endorsement of party-consistent idols, such as distinguished Democratic or Republican celebrities, has a greater impact on endorser attitudes, party attitudes, turnout intentions, and intentions to vote for the advertised party than that of political figures or regular citizens. Although the endorsement of these leaders mostly impact Americans' political views and actions, it can also impact their day-to-day lives, such as where they buy their clothes. The most recent and clear example of this is the public reaction to Nike's Colin Kaepernick ad. After the release of the ad, which had the tagline, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything," in relation to Kaepernick's Take a Knee protests, Nike stocks reached an all-time high, closing at 83.83. Also, the online sales of Nike gear jumped to 31% only 2 days after the ad was released, which was nearly double of the previous year's sales, according to CBS News. Although celebrity endorsement mostly leads to positive impacts on Americans' opinions and the spread and growth of the social and political movements that they support, it can also have negative consequences. This can be seen in the cases of Jussie Smollett and Amber Heard, two actors who brought an overwhelming amount of criticism and opposition to the movements that they support because of their actions. Smollett, who was a supporter of Black Lives Matter, who was allegedly faked a hate crime of himself, and Heard, a Me Too advocate who accused her ex-husband Johnny Depp of domestic violence, but was recently sued by Depp for her false claims and for being the perpetrator of domestic violence herself, with multiple amounts of evidence against her. These two cases discredited the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements, causing a lot of skepticism around the cases of other alleged victims that used the movements as platforms. So what can be done to avoid these negative impacts? Well, the best solution is to encourage the immediate investigation of allegations and to enact legal punishment on those who make false allegations, which would discourage people from lying. Also, conducting research into the validity of these allegations before believing in them and being wary of claims that have no evidence to avoid the discrediting of the movement they support would be good ideas. Lastly, I'd like to point out the importance of the impact of celebrity endorsements of political and social movements on the opinion of Americans by looking at these two surveys by the Pew Research Center from 2016. According to the research, most U.S. adults get their political news from TV or online, which would expose them to the influences of these celebrity endorsements and the movements around them. Also, this next survey shows that more than half of registered U.S. voters think that the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities and gun policies are top issues when they're considering who they're going to vote for. Through the spread of the Take a Knee, March for Our Lives, and Black Lives Matter movements by influential figures, the number of Americans involved and interested in these issues is only expected to grow, which directly impacts the political direction of the United States. What questions do you have? Thank you.
All right, 2 questions and a half for you. Number 1, how did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process?
Well, at first, my research question was about only anti-racism, so we're going to talk about only the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, but then I realized that there wasn't that much evidence about that, so I expanded it to other movements such as the Me Too movement and Take a Knee and everything.
All right, and explain the level of certainty you are about your solution to the issue.
I'm pretty sure about my solution because most of the research that I looked at said that the impact is positive, and that the main negative thing around this issue was that there were many people making false claims which were discrediting the movements. So if they investigated these false claims and made harsher punishments for them, then I think the negative impacts would decrease.